This week I'm going to show you how to repack an FMF Shorty silencer. This one's on my 2016 YZ250. The bike has about 80 hours on it, but the silencer has, I don't know, maybe around 70 or so. So I'm way overdue. Usually you're supposed to do these around the 20-hour mark, but way she goes, I guess. Should go without saying, these are pretty easy to get off. It's going to be different for each bike, whatever you happen to be running, but you usually have to take your side panel off, and then they'll have a couple hangers. Some 125s, it's only one hanger, and then the silencer will slip off from the expansion pipe right here, and she just comes off that way. Now I've got set up here kind of most of the tools that you're actually going to need to do this job. It's not too bad. You're going to need a tape measure, some scissors to cut the new packing, a 532, zoom in there, yeah, 5/32 hex to get these off, and also a side note, a parts washer, if you got one, would come in handy. You'll see why in a minute. I don't have one myself, but there are alternatives to do, which I'll show you. So real simple. There's 3 of these hex-headed screws that hold the, not the end cap, but the backside off. The end caps on these are riveted. See, they have these little pop rivets here. For complete disassembly, you would take that off, but I'm not going to in this instance. I'm just going to repack. Once you get the screws out, this one being brand new, they seal it with high temp silicone all in this edge here, so you can get a knife or a small flat screwdriver like this to try and pick away at the silicone, because it'll be tough to separate the two. Once you get the silicone all cut, just grab a small punch or a screwdriver, put it in the holes, and kind of pry it up against the back plate there, and it should start working itself off of the canister. Pop it out. Then you got to go get all the old insulation or packing out of the canister. A few ways to do this. This stuff was pretty dry and caked onto the outside, so I ended up kind of breaking it free with this screwdriver here. But you always want to wear gloves when doing this, because it is essentially fiberglass insulation, and I don't know if you've ever dealt with that at home, but you don't really want to be getting it on your skin or even inhaling it for that matter. So try and do this in a well ventilated area, or I mean, if you really want, throw a mask on too. Pulled out an interesting amount of of insulation hairs there. I'm not too sure. It must be the stuff they use from the factory just around the core. It had some strength to it, but threw that all away and then break apart the rest. Now this bike, I pretty much lived at the sand track, and I do most of my riding there, so this thing's under heavy load all the time and RPMs are high, so the bike's very hot, and I don't really have a problem, as you can see here, with spooge or just raw oil getting left in the muffler at all. Some bikes that you will do it to will have oil still sitting in there, but if it's properly jetted and you're running it hard enough, you shouldn't have anything like that. Anyway, get all the old stuff cleaned out, and then we'll clean the parts. And I had a look at my kind of diffuser here. None of the holes are plugged, they're all open. Like I say, sometimes you'll find them carboned up after a long time or improper jetting. And for a social experiment, I thought I'd try and run the bike, see what it sounded like without any packing at all, to give you kind of an idea of a blown out muffler. So putting it back together, and I can throw it in. So as you can tell, it kind of sounds very tin canny. It's insanely loud even at an idle, so I just shut her down so the neighbors wouldn't get pissed. Next, get your tape measure out and measure the body of the canister, which you're going to be sliding it into. This one measured about 10 inches evenly, but from my experience, I can never fit the full 10 inches in, so I'm going to cut it to 9 3/4, and I'm going to run that. Here's the new packing here. It's essentially insulation, even what you'd use in your house, except this one's for pro riders, so obviously that's the one for me. We roll out our new stuff and measure the 9 3/4 and just kind of start cutting. I just eyeball rough cut the whole way along. You don't really need to be that terribly precise. So I got the new piece cut, but before we put it in, we're gonna need to clean up the old stuff here. So this I debated whether to clean or not. Really, it doesn't look bad at all. I don't see any holes that are gummed over. We got to clean out the old shit out of the inside here, especially the old high temp silicone around the rim here before we put new stuff on. So here's where I said you can use an alternate to a parts wash if you don't have one. This happens to be not Rotella, but Jet A1 more specifically. Well, I'm an aircraft mechanic by trade, and for those of you that don't know, jet fuel is essentially kerosene or diesel. Like they're all three of those are pretty similar. Only differences are a few additives. But anyway, so we sump the airplanes every day to check for water. And once we sump 4 liters of fuel out of each wing every single day, every airplane we have in the fleet, it's scrap. It can't go back into the machines. So I take a pail home, and I usually use this to clean air filters. As you can see, is why it's blue. It does a great job at degreasing. So I'm going to use it for this stuff here. Let's just see how much we can get off. See how much black shit comes off if we let it soak in here for a while. Okay, as expected, there wasn't really much to get off here in the first place, so she's pretty clean. Just clean off the silicone around this lip here. We had to apply some new stuff on this whole flat surface before we put it back in. And same thing here. Make sure especially the mating surface is cleaned up. And I just used Scotch-Brite for what I could reach, and this brass brush here to kind of get some of the schmoo out of there, but she's pretty good. Start by laying it out, and you just kind of roll it up like a burrito, and you're going to come to a point where it's kind of about the same diameter of the canister, so you just snip off what you figure you need. And as always, it's a better idea to snip off too little than too much. So if you need to cut more, don't be afraid to do it again. And then it's just a matter of feeding it in. You slide the packing down into the butt plate kind of receptacle as far as you can, and then you just kind of work it all down. I probably had a little too much material when I did it here, but once I got it halfway down, you're kind of committed at that point anyway, so it'll form in there, and it's not that big a deal. And you just use a little screwdriver to help you with that last little bit. Get the pipe lined up with the end cap, and it should just slide in. And that's all there is to that part. Next, grab some high temp silicone gasket maker. This stuff I had laying around, so I was going to use it. Then you got to slide the pipe back out just enough to expose that mating surface there, and then I just clean it off with a bit of brake cleaner and let it dry, so the silicone has a clean surface to grab onto. Then you just butter on a little bit. You don't need much at all, just kind of a light film on the whole thing. Then you slide it back in and make sure the end cap lines back up, and then you go and clean off all the excess that came out. Next, I grab each screw. Now the screws need to be sealed as well, just a little bit, but before you do that, I like to make sure that all 3 holes line up perfectly. So I grab each one, thread it in. It should thread in nicely by hand. There's only a few threads for those things to grab onto, so you don't really want to screw it up. And once all 3 of them line up together, you take them back out, just put a little dot of the gasket maker in each hole, and then reset each screw and tighten them up a little bit. They don't need to be very tight. If you make them too tight, it'll actually deform the canister, and also you risk pulling the threads out of the receptacle as well. So they don't need to be all that tight. And once again, wipe off all the excess, give everything a good clean, and we're done. Throw it back on the bike. Let's give it a try. So I hope this video helped you guys. If any of you were wondering how to do this, it really isn't a hard job at all, and it should be done more often than every 70 hours. So keep her pinned, and yeah, have a good one.